Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's now a couple minutes after 7, and I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, to another All Candidates meeting. It is also being held via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube. Before we commence, I'd kind of like to do a little informal survey. How many of you came here tonight not knowing who you are going to vote for? Good.
There's at least 10.
Well, hopefully you will know by the end of the meeting. I'm Lorraine Harvey. I'm chair of the Seymour Community Association, and I'm pleased to be your moderator this evening. Before we begin, may I ask everyone to please mute their cell phones if you have not already done so. Thank you. I just remembered to do mine. This meeting is being hosted by the Community Associations of Blueridge, Deep Cove, and Seymour, as well as Parkgate Society. Our thanks to Parkgate for the use of their Zoom webinar program, and we also thank Mount Seymour United Church for the use of their space this evening. It's a wonderful facility for this type of meeting. Representing the Blueridge CA is Eric Anderson. Deep Cove is represented by Catherine Fagerland and Chris Salas. And representing the Seymour CA are Carol Ann Roberts, Tony Roberts, John Hunter if he's here, not yet, and Peter Tivan. He's at the back on the sound. We are also grateful to Adele Wilson, the Executive Director of Parkgate Society, for being our collector of questions and general assistant of all things tonight. Candidates, I'm going to introduce you now. Would you please stand up as I introduce you? First of all, we have Brad Nickerson representing the People's Party of Canada.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Next, we have...
Can you hear me?
I hope so.
Okay.
No, hang on. Not yet.
Oh,
Next, we have Kelsey Shein representing the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm not sure if he's councillor in this context, but Jim Hanson representing the NDP. And Terry Beech, Liberal Party of Canada. The Green candidate, Gary Doling, sends his regrets. His schedule did not allow for him to be here this evening. For the benefit of those who are not able to attend this meeting, we are recording it, and it will be posted shortly on the Facebook pages of the Blueridge and Community Association Facebook pages. Please share this information with your own contacts as you see fit. The format of the meeting has been explained to candidates, but for the benefit of our audience, I will outline it briefly. Candidates will have 2 minutes to make their opening and closing statements. To get things underway, the organizing groups have prepared some questions which will be asked of each candidate, and they will have 1 minute to answer the question, after which we will commence with your questions. They will also have 1 minute to answer the questions from you. All comments will be timed. Our timer will turn on the yellow light indicating there is 15 seconds left, and it's on already. Once the red light goes on, candidates will have 5 seconds to conclude. And if they're still speaking at that point, I'm going to put my hand up and tell you that your time is up. Candidates have 3 wild cards, and Mr. Nickerson, can you hold up one of them so they can see it? They're bright chartreuse or something. They can use these to rebut the comments made by other candidates. They will have 1 minute to comment, and when the rebuttals are being used, they will be collected, so there's no do-overs. We have cards to write your questions. Some people have already got them. If you have your own pen or pencil, please use that. Otherwise, we do have some for your own use. Please write your questions legibly and hold them up for collection. Those attending via Zoom will also be able to post questions, and we are monitoring the computer for those. We reserve the right to edit questions for brevity, relevance, and taste, and to combine questions that are of a similar nature. And as we always seem to get more questions than we have time for, please do not be disappointed if you did not hear your specific question asked. Sorry? Yes, put hands up if you want a card or a pencil, whatever it is you need. Okay? So now I am going to begin the meeting. The first question for the candidates, and I'm going to start with Mr. Nickerson, and then the next question will be first asked by Kelsey, so it'll go down the line, so you'll have the first crack at the questions as we go. COVID shows us that one of the major economic contributors to a healthy economy is the availability of affordable and accessible child care. In fact, child care was deemed to be an essential service throughout the pandemic, as it allows more people to maintain active and regular employment. Further, studies have shown that government subsidies for child care will contribute more money into the economy than any amount of government expenditure, making it a smart economic decision to provide the country with affordable child care. Given that BC is well underway with their universal child care plans and are currently working with child care providers to set up more universal care prototype sites, how will your party ensure affordable child care for families, the availability of quality child care workers, a decent living wage for child care workers, and an increase in child care spaces to satisfy the overwhelming demand for child care in our communities? Mr. Nickerson, it's all yours.
Are we doing introductions?
Pardon me?
Opening statements?
Oh, your introductions. My goodness, I'm sorry. First.
So now I
You
have
have lots of
Now
time to
you,
think about that.
now
I
you
introduce
can go. But please, I'm not repeating the question.
I got most of it.
Okay.
But for those who don't understand that there's a bit of sidebar communication between Lorraine and I, I'm stone cold deaf in my right ear. So I can hear Kelsey really well, but I really have to strain to hear the question. So if I answer the wrong question, I beg you to bear with me. My name is Brad Nickerson.
Move it closer. You have to be about 6 inches. Yeah.
My name is Brad Nickerson, and I'm with the People's Party of Canada. The interesting question is what brings me here tonight to be with you, and thank you very much for inviting me, Lorraine. Like the rest of us, when the lockdowns came in March of 2020, my office was closed, and I had to work from home. And what I do for a living is I analyze medical information for its legal and probative value. What I mean by that is I analyze medical records, medical reports, and I provide advice, guidance, and consulting work to law firms on whether they can rely on that information in a court of law. What's the value of it? In April of 2020, with not much to do, I began to do what I normally do, only I began to study the data that was coming out concerning the COVID pandemic. By early May of last year, I came to the conclusion that there were some things that didn't add up. And there was a tremendous amount of work I put into learning as much as I could possibly know. And by the spring of this year, as these measures have continued, I made the decision that I, a rather quiet, private person, would go into politics. And that's why I'm here tonight.
Are you done?
No.
Is it complete? Okay. Kelsey, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Shein, and I'm your federal Conservative candidate here in Burnaby, North Seymour. So I want to begin with a round of thank yous. I want to thank the Seymour Community Associations for hosting us here tonight, and I want to thank Lorraine for being our moderator in tonight's event. I want to thank everybody who went out this weekend and voted and did your civic duty. Thank you, and if you haven't, remember September 20th is the day, so go get in then. Finally, I want to thank all of our volunteers from our Get Out the Vote weekend. We knocked on thousands of doors, we entered thousands of pieces of data, and as such, we've gotten out thousands of votes. The momentum on this campaign is only possible because of your hard work, and I want to truly thank you for this. And now I just want to acknowledge that there are quite a few people in this room that I've met exclusively from knocking on your doors. So thank you for your engagement, and thank you for joining us this evening as we talk about the issues that are most important to our communities. Now, briefly, my name is Kelsey Shein, and I'm running because I believe the future is bright. I'm a longtime volunteer and grassroots organizer, and I got involved with advocacy because I believed that we could build a more vibrant business community in North Vancouver. That addiction to advocacy never stopped, and so I moved to Ottawa, where I worked for the Canadian Medical Association. I traveled coast to coast working with physicians, medical students, and patients, giving a voice to those who are not heard. Recently, I felt, though, that our government no longer responds to our people. I'm concerned, and I wanted to do something about it. So I put my name on this ballot, and I've knocked on 10,000 doors. I'm incredibly touched, and I'm excited to talk about Canada's recovery plan and Canada's Conservatives' plan to secure the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Hello. For those of you I've not had the pleasure to meet already, I'm Jim Hanson. And by way of a very brief introduction, I'm a two-term councillor in the District of North Vancouver. By profession, I'm a lawyer in private practice. I have a spouse, Ruth Hanson, who is with us today. We've been married for 25 years. We have 2 adult children. I was born and raised in Seymour, and we live in Seymour now. However, during 12 years of our marriage, we resided in North Burnaby, and my wife was born in Burnaby. During the last several weeks, I have spoken to many, many voters, and I believe that Trudeau has failed Burnaby North Seymour. He said he'd pursue a climate action plan, but he bought a bitumen pipeline. He said he would have a national housing strategy, and yet housing costs have gone up 50%, and families, including my family, are being torn apart because we can't find housing in the same community. He said he'd introduce a pharmacare plan, and yet I've met voters on the doorsteps who tell me they have to choose between necessary medicines and necessary living expenses. I'm proud to be a candidate with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP because we're going to pursue a strong climate action plan, more affordable housing, and introduce pharmacare, dental care, head-to-toe medicine so that we have a comprehensive universal healthcare scheme in Canada. I'm proud to campaign with Jagmeet Singh because better is possible and because we will keep our promises. Thank you for coming out tonight. Your engagement is important, and I look forward to speaking with you about the issues of our community.
Go ahead, Terry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Terry Beech, and to be perfectly honest, I got into politics to help people. And I joined the Liberal Party because I believe that every person deserves a fair and real shot at success. And I came here to this church in 2015 and promised to invest in the middle class. And by almost every measure, that plan has worked. Before the pandemic, we accomplished a lot. We had the lowest rate of poverty in the country's history, and that included lifting 400,000 kids out of poverty. The lowest debt servicing costs of any government in over 100 years. All while growing the economy, protecting the environment, and investing in important things like housing, infrastructure, and reconciliation. We've also taken more action on climate change than any government in Canada's history. When the pandemic hit, we used our enviable fiscal position to finance the cost of the pandemic, so businesses, nonprofits, and households didn't have to do it personally. Tens of thousands of businesses have been saved, and so were millions of jobs and thousands of lives. Our approach focused on health and well-being of Canadians, which strengthened our recovery. While the US has only recovered 75% of employment, we've recovered 93% in Canada and over 100% in British Columbia. We have a plan that restores our fiscal track and grows our economy while making important investments in housing affordability, universal childcare, pharmacare, as well as fighting climate change. These are big programs, but we are up to the challenge, and over time, they will more than pay for themselves. I personally have invested significant time and energy into learning to be a highly effective member of Parliament. I was named Parliamentarian of the Year by my fellow MPs, and I've kept up the best customer service rating of any MP in British Columbia. I have built a reputation based on hard work, trust, and on delivering results. It has been my greatest honor to serve you over these last 6 years, and I am here today to humbly ask your support for a third term. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the candidates for keeping within their 2 minutes. So now we're going to go back to that question on childcare, if you all remember it. So we'll start with Brad. I'm not repeating it. 1 minute. 1 minute.
My days of worrying about daycare for my children is long over. However, I do have a son who this is actually a very pressing issue. Him and his wife are both working professionals here in Vancouver. They both have very good jobs, and they have a child. And this is something that they're worrying about very much right now. And I won't go into the specifics of the childcare plan that the two branches of the government have announced for British Columbia, because I think Terry will probably cover that, because it was his government that helped negotiate the deal. What I will say is what I heard from my experts about the shortfalls in the program, that it's not doing much for families that need childcare now. The costs are between $1,200 to $1,600 a month, and they're, am I over?
15 seconds.
And consideration needs to be given for the families who need assistance right now as a bridging component. Other than that, I think the plan is fine, and they should be congratulated for negotiating it.
Thank you. Kelsey.
So I'm hearing that Canadian families need childcare now. Not a promise for childcare in 5 years, not what the Liberals have been promising for the last 10 elections or for the last 40 years. So Canada's Conservatives have a plan to convert the child care expense deduction into a refundable tax credit that will be able to be accessed by low-income families for up to 75% of the cost of child care immediately. This will really work to give families choice and something that is tangible in the present. Now, this is a flexible and comprehensive approach that will provide more assistance to almost all families. And when families are able to access childcare, more money is, like Lorraine said, put into the economy, into childcare spaces, and allowing for more childcare spaces to grow in future. Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you, Lorraine. I can say that as I speak to voters across Burnaby North Seymour, this is an issue that comes up again and again. And I'm very aware of the economic studies that have proven that childcare is critical not only to social equity, a humanitarian society, but also to the economic success of our society. Our plan is for a $10 a day daycare, comprehensive $10 a day daycare in collaboration with the provinces. And I know we're going to hear about a Liberal plan which is very similar, but you're going to have to put that against Trudeau's promises. Has he lived up to anything that he's told you ever? Our plan is for $10 a day daycare. We're going to focus on the training of the childcare workers, ensure they have a living wage, and ensure that the much needed childcare comes across this country for our social economic benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terry.
So something that's changed for me personally since the last time I was here is now I have a 7-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, and my wife manufactures bathtubs and sinks, and so I certainly know the value of childcare. To let Jim and Kelsey know, this is not a promise. It's already been delivered. BC was the first province to sign on. We are delivering 50% reductions in the next 12 months and 40,000 new spaces. The Conservative plan is a refundable tax credit that doesn't provide significant help to most families, and it doesn't create a single space. A refundable tax credit does not create spaces. Anybody who's ever signed up for childcare, I did it on the day my first child was born, know that you're often waiting 18 months to 2 years. So the Liberal plan, everybody's already talked about the economics of it. Everybody's already talked about how when we invest $1 into childcare, we get $3 back into the economy. We need to make this happen, and we need to make sure the Conservatives don't tear up the plan that we've already signed.
Thank you. This question is going to go to Kelsey first. In recent years, the situation has become strained between Canada and China, especially when it comes to what is referred to as hostage diplomacy involving the two Michaels and others. Given that international diplomacy is the responsibility of the federal government, what is your opinion on these incarcerations? And if elected, how would you work to resolve the situation? And secondly, how should Huawei interest in selling 5G technology to Canada factor into your answer?
Okay, 60 seconds. All right, so the communist leadership represents a clear and rising threat to Canada, and only Canada's Conservatives will act and take this threat seriously. We will negotiate for the safe return of our two Michaels. I was with our leader last week as he marked the 1,000th day that the Michael Kovrig and Seymour have been imprisoned by the Chinese Communist Party. This is unacceptable, and Canada's Conservatives will act. Now, we will work to build a coalition of democracies with the goal of decoupling Canada's economic supply chains that come from China as an important step so that we do no longer have reliance on Chinese economic goods, and that we work to create a North America partnership and also withdraw from the China-led Asia Infrastructure Bank. Only Canada's Conservatives have a real plan to get tough on China.
Thank you. Same question, Jim.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'll start by saying the NDP position is clear: no to Huawei and 5G. So we're not. That would be a security risk for Canada and for Canadians. On the issue of the two Michaels, this is obviously a very distressing circumstance. It is an issue in my very family in terms of topic of discussion and protest and anger. It is obviously, as a lawyer, a violation of natural justice in its most profound sense and should not be tolerated. We need to diversify away from trade with China. Ultimately, we have economic levers that we must pull. We must increase our efforts to protect Canadian data and intellectual property. Canada has been threatened by China by the detaining of these two Michaels and by other terrible human rights abuses. We must speak out for the Uyghurs, and we must stand up to cyber attacks and theft of intellectual property by China. We'll take this very seriously.
Thank you very much. Terry?
It is absolutely deplorable what has happened to two Canadian citizens and the two Michaels. The arbitrary detainment that has been noted has been going on for over 1,000 days is absolutely unacceptable. We have been actively diversifying our trade. We're now one of the most trade-connected countries in the world. We also have been creating a coalition of democracies to weigh in on this. Do not make any mistake, the Liberal government is not soft on foreign policy. Marc Garneau is a very talented foreign minister, as was Chrystia Freeland. And we had 4 years of diplomatic relationships strained with the United States in the Trump presidency. We were able to navigate that. We were able to deliver a stronger NAFTA agreement. So when it comes to foreign policy and sensitive issues like the Michaels, like Huawei, it is very easy to throw stones from outside, but the diplomatic strategies of Canada are strong. We are united, and we need to make sure that we bring those two guys home.
Thanks very much. Brad, it's your turn on that question. Oh, sorry, we have a rebuttal.
I want to bring up something that's... Oh,
yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Me first?
Yeah, you first.
I want to bring up something that comes up on the doors every single day, and it's quite infuriating to myself and Canadians, and that's, why are we having this election? And I think one of the most common reasons why people are infuriated is because of the crisis that is happening in Afghanistan. And that instead of putting Canada's efforts into diplomatic safety missions to get out those who helped us most, We are in a pandemic fourth wave election. This is irresponsible, this is selfish, and it doesn't demonstrate strong and stable government. I think Canadians deserve better, and I won't let an opportunity pass us by to not talk about the crises of our foreign affairs right now.
Thanks. Now it's Brad's turn to answer the question on China.
The incarceration of the two Michaels by the Communist Party of China is quite obviously hostage diplomacy. What's going on is Canada is, like many other small and medium-sized countries, caught in a power struggle between the U.S. and China, the current hegemon and the rising power. And like most countries in the world, they're going to have to make a choice about what side they ultimately land on, but most trading countries are going to try and hold out as long as they can before they have to make that choice. In terms of Canada, our choice is pretty simple. We run a $30 billion a year trade deficit with China annually, and only 4% of our exports go to China. 75% of our exports go to the United States, 75%. At the end of the day, we will land on the side of the United States in this global struggle. And that's just the way it is.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm now going on to the next question. It will be answered by Jim, starting with Jim. Across Canada, not just the bigger cities, housing affordability is at a crisis level. So far, the main reply from many politicians has been to address housing supply and increase density. But as we know from examples here in North Vancouver and Burnaby, greater density and greater supply alone do not translate into affordability. If elected, what will your government do to support housing that is not market-driven, e.g. co-ops, co-op housing, housing pegged to income, so that young, lower, and middle-income earners here in our riding can actually remain in their community? Jim, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. I want to start by saying that this is an issue which affects me very personally. I grew up in North Vancouver close to my grandparents. My children grew up close to their grandparents, and in this way our family's traditions were passed down generation to generation. Because of the failed Trudeau housing plan, where the cost of housing has gone up 50% in the last 6 years, it's very likely the case that my children they have had to move away, and they likely will not come back. Our plan calls for the building of 500,000 affordable units, actual affordable units, not just market housing, but affordable units. It calls for a 20% foreign buyers tax to take some of the speculative money out of housing, a doubling of the home buyers tax credit, prosecuting money launderers, who are a big part of the flow of cash into our housing market, and the introduction of 30-year CMHC insured mortgages instead of 25. These measures are the best measures of any party for housing affordability.
Thank you. Terry, your turn.
So the first thing to understand is the federal government has been basically absent from housing for almost 30 years. Up until 2015, when we started our national housing strategy, it started as an $8 billion plan. It has grown in ambition to a $72 billion plan. We have 3 planks in our platform to increase supply, 1.4 million homes over the next 4 years, to taper demand, primarily by taking the incentives out of corporate investing in housing, either REITs or corporate ownership. We are also creating a financial crimes agency to look at the money laundering issue, and we're providing a pathway to home ownership. But all of us are going to talk about our amazing housing plans. I'm going to refer to Generation Squeeze that have done an individual assessment of everybody's housing plan based on the criteria of every Canadian being able to have an affordable place to live by 2030. The Liberal plan is 6.6 out of 10, the Greens 3.75, the NDP at 3.4, and the Conservatives dead last at 2.5 out of 10.
Thank you. Brad.
Housing affordability. The challenges facing families, individuals, people who live, work, go to school here, regarding housing affordability are not resolvable until we have the courage and the honesty to confront the elephant in the room, money laundering. As anybody who's read Sam Cooper's book, Willful Blindness, Vancouver and British Columbia has become a hub for transnational money laundering involving different cartels and what have you. And until this problem is solved, simply building new inventory is not going to solve the problem, because that inventory is either obscenely unaffordable for professional couples earning together $200,000 a year or more. What I propose is a federal interagency task force to tackle this problem, including using all the divisions of enforcement, including RCMP, Border Security Services, FinTrack, and the Federal Prosecutor Service. And we need laws in order to get this done, like RICO statutes.
Thank you. Kelsey?
Thank you. All right, so Lorraine mentioned supply-based solutions, so I'm going to mention a couple of those before I move on into our local issue. So we are going to build 1 million homes in 3 years. This is important because the supply is not there. It is going to be tied to infrastructure and transit spending. We are going to work with the municipalities to look for innovative solutions to get homes built, especially in mid-density, and we're going to put a 2-year ban on foreign buyers. This will stabilize the economy, the housing market, and it is a very, very good start. Additionally, we will extend the mortgage, we'll encourage a new market in 7 to 10-year mortgages, so that first-time buyers and people who are looking to enter the housing market have more options to lock in their rate.
A rebuttal coming from Jim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Lorraine. And I want to respond to my conservative friend's comments about supply addressing housing affordability. And this is an issue I have some expertise over as a councillor in the district over the last 7 years. We've built an awful lot of market-based housing, and yet it always seems to come out about $1 million, $1.5 million. And there seems to be buyers one after another. In some cases, the developers were marketing the products in China. It's not good enough to come forward with supply-based housing solutions. It won't produce housing that my children can afford and raise their families near me here in Burnaby, North Seymour. We need market interventions, co-ops, affordable housing, supportive housing, social housing, and we need those investments. And our plan is the plan that has those investments for that category of housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're now going to move to questions which have been submitted from residents. And I'm going to start with Brad again. There are questions from residents. So the first questions that you answered were from the groups, the organizers, just to get things started. Okay. So this question comes from a resident. I'm not going to name him. Residents of the North Shore have to put up with gridlock everywhere, originating from the 3 municipalities: Squamish, Whistler, and the ferry terminal. A rapid transit-only system will not address all the transportation needs. The projected lifespan of the second Narrows Bridge is less than 50 years. If you are elected, will you and your party start planning for a larger capacity bridge that will service the needs of vehicular traffic in the decades to come? Traffic.
I'm sorry, the question addresses specifically the building of a
replacement of the second Narrows Bridge.
Right. Yes. Kelsey can have my time.
That's what happens when you ask a yes or no question. Kelsey, say more than yes or no.
Yeah. All right. So first, I'm just going to talk about some of the projects we want to get built right away. We think part of Canada's recovery plan is infrastructure and putting people to work building that infrastructure. So we've committed to getting the Holdham Street overpass built. We're committing to getting the SFU gondola built. And I'm very interested in working with the province and the municipalities to see what other shovel-ready projects we can get off the ground. And this could include the transit expansion for the second Narrows Bridge. So I'm listening, and I'm hoping that we can get that moving so that we can get shovel-ready projects built. When it comes to this additional gridlock and vehicle traffic, I am incredibly interested in advocating for a North Shore solution that connects cars with either side. So I'm interested in looking and understanding how we can get this done.
Kelsey's probably one of the only people in this room that is thinking ahead 50 years. Jim, please, your answer.
Thank you, Lorraine. No, 50 years, it's beyond my horizon. I look back 50 years, I was 50 years ago, and I'll make the observation that we had exactly the same road system, substantially, 50 years ago as we have today, and yet we've had so much development, so much population increase, and so much more demand on our throughfare, the Trans-Canada Highway. And yes, it is the case that the iron workers will need to be replaced, but much higher priority is rapid transit to the North Shore. And we're badly in need of federal investment in rapid transit that will relieve much of the pressure or some of the pressure from the iron workers. And there's been promises made, there's been suggestions about in those types of investments. It must be collaborative and multi-government, and yet we've seen nothing from Trudeau.
Well, we've seen a little something. Something like the biggest investment in transit and public transportation infrastructure in the history of the country. But maybe that's nothing. On the North Shore, we've seen the impact of a new C-bus. We've seen the Laurel Lynn improvement projects that was expanded when we were elected in 2015. And we've been advocating through the next step process for rapid transit. And my preferred route is now the preferred route, which is from the C-bus to Caplan or across the Second Narrows up Hastings, so you have an option for a Great West Express line on the north side of Willingdon, and then down Willingdon to Brentwood, passing BCIT, the hospital, and Brentwood along the way. This will be fantastic, but our infrastructure dollars and our commitment to the mayor's desire to have long-term stable transit funding, we've brought that up. We've delivered that. But it's important to know that the priorities are also arranged with the province, and they've wanted to get the Langley line done, they wanted to get the UBC line done, they also wanted to get the Massey Tunnel done. So the North Shore is next, and I'm going to make sure the North Shore is next.
Thank you. Our next question. As one of the hardest hit and last to recover industries in Canada, tourism has survived because of the Liberal government's COVID support programs. However, these programs are winding down and will end next month. Will you and your party support an extension of these programs for the hardest hit companies? And we're going to start with Kelsey.
Sure. Thank you for this question. This is a very, very important question. It's top of mind for anybody working in tourism or service industries. And I'm going to tell you what our plan is. We are going to start new programs that keep people back to work, and it specifically pumps cash into our tourism industry. So I'm going to talk about two really briefly. One is the Explore Canada program, where Canadians will be given a 15% tax credit for vacation expenses up to $1,000 across Canada. This has been a really wonderful time to explore Canada, and we're going to compensate Canadians for that, pumping $1 billion into our economy. The second one is the Dine and Discover. So Monday to Wednesday, if you are dining out on food and beverage, non-alcoholic beverages that is, you will receive a 50% credit for that. I have handfuls more economic policies about how we get folks back to work, but those are two that I think are very specific to tourism and food and beverage industries that are close to my heart.
Thank you. Jim is writing. Carry on. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. Well, it's a well-known historical fact that it was the NDP in the House of Commons that pressed and used its minority position to press for the levels of support that were required for workers and small business during CERB. And this is a matter that I was acutely aware of because my child is a server. and found himself, because of the obliteration of the tourism industry in COVID, entirely unable to work. And so it was very important to us, to him, that he had these levels of support. The NDP pledges ongoing support where needed to small business and to the employees of small business. We wish to make some modifications that will be useful, such as allowing people to pursue training while on EI, paying for EI and CPP for new hires, and generally standing behind workers and small business in their time of need. That's our pledge.
Kerry?
So as the Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Development in BC, I've paid very close attention to the struggling tourism and events industries, and you're correct, they are alive because of government support. The best way to help the tourism and events industry is to enact a science, health-focused response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to get back to normal so that these event operators can open back up and start providing their services. What we do not need is an ideological COVID-19 response, similar to what's going on in Alberta, where you have doctors and nurses telling us that the healthcare system is about to break down. That is the number one thing we can do. The second thing that I personally worked on was diversifying Western diversification and turning it into Pacifican so that we can build economic development programs specific to British Columbia with the same per capita spending that they've been getting in Quebec and Ontario. And that was something that I delivered here just before the election as Parliamentary Secretary in that department.
Thank you. Brad?
I don't believe my party has an official position on the question of ongoing supports for the tourism and travel industry. So I have one, though. The global travel tourism business is unlikely to ever fully recover from what we've just been through. The good news is that more Canadians are likely going to be traveling within Canada than without as well. What these operators have been through, and those of you have even survived, are it's remarkable. So I would support continuing with ongoing support programs for the tourism and vacation industry, with a mind's eye to be moving to phasing them out over time and being very clear and concise about what that time frame is going to be.
Thank you. This is a little different, this question. I'm going to just sort of say, hands up, how many of you are double vaccinated? Okay. What are your thoughts on mandatory vaccines and passports? And we're going to start with Terry.
Well, I think I might have made that clear in my response to the last question. The federal government does not mandate what the individual provincial health officers do. And so the pandemic has been quite different in Atlantic Canada than it has been in BC, than it has been in Alberta and Ontario. But we have been supporting the provinces every step of the way. For the aspects that the federal government does control, such as travel on planes, travel on trains, and our federal employees, we are the largest employer in the country, we are requiring mandatory vaccinations. And the reason for this is because we need to end the pandemic. We have been there, and we've said that we're going to be there for as long as it takes and do whatever it takes to keep businesses and Canadians supported, but we cannot continue to run these deficits forever. We need to end this pandemic, and we are in a position to do so with the most vaccinated country in the world, one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. We need to keep pushing and get past this.
Brad?
I'm of the view that the vaccine passports are not only unethical, but I believe they're not lawful. I read the public health order that was released on Friday very carefully yesterday, and I do not believe that these are even necessary. And I do believe that what's going on with the passports is not, once again, as I term I used earlier, validly predicated. The vaccines themselves don't protect from infection. They are posited to prevent you from developing serious consequences, but even that is starting to fade. The key area, there's been some issues with the clinical studies, which I would need more time to discuss with you. This is actually a very technical subject. I've researched it thoroughly, and anybody who wants to talk to me about it where we have more than a minute, I'd be happy to do so, but I do not, under the circumstances, support vaccine passports.
Thank you. Kelsey.
All right, so this is a question that is asked a lot because I think people have a lot of fear. I want to talk about my own personal experience working at the Canadian Medical Association, where we would do vaccine campaigns and do everything we could to encourage Canadians to get vaccines for just a flu shot. And I think this speaks importantly to what we're talking about right now. We would like to get Canada to a 90% vaccination rate, and the way to do this is not to divide people and to fearmonger like Mr. Trudeau has been doing. It's been an absolute disaster that he's been trying to pit Canadians against each other and bring in a divisive style of American politics. It's really sad. And what I think we should do instead is work with compassion and understanding to educate everyone who is potentially discouraged from getting a vaccine or feels uncomfortable because they've been isolated from other medical issues. And this includes Indigenous people, this means racialized people. We need to understand and educate people to get to that 90% level.
Thanks very much. Jim. Jim, yes, go. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Lorraine. So, are we always going?
Yes.
Okay.
Just, it's fair that way, don't you think?
The NDP supports vaccine passports on a federal level. In fact, would have introduced the policy earlier. We also would support vaccines as being mandatory for federal workers. My priority will always be public health and public safety. And we will stand with policies and principles that protect our healthcare system and protect us from getting sick. And just on this whole maddening issue of vaccines and masks and people who want to protest such measures, I can say that as a lawyer, I've given it all some thought. And it is true that we have the right not to be vaccinated. And it's true that we have the right perhaps not to wear masks, but we don't have the right to make other people sick. And we will stand behind laws and policies which create a safe and healthy community.
Mr. Nickerson has a rebuttal. Thank you. Please.
Mr. Hanson, what evidence do you have that unvaccinated people are making vaccinated people sick?
Do you care to rebut that? He was talking to your comments.
I was operating under the principle I wasn't to interrupt, but would you like me actually to answer that question?
Yes.
Well, you're a lawyer, sir. You've just made an assertion, and this is the jury. And I've researched this voluminously, and I'd like to know where that came from because I've never seen that.
Well, it is clear that COVID-19 is a virus. People get sick with it, people get infected with it, and people spread it around. And if you're not vaccinated, you're more likely to catch this terrible virus, and you're more likely to spread it around both to people that are unvaccinated and sadly, even to people like me that have been conscientious and been vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I don't want you, sir, to make me sick.
Terry has a comment.
Well, I'm gonna do two things. One, I have 2 unvaccinated children, and being able to send them to baby gymnastics without them getting COVID is exactly why these policies need to happen. And in terms of evidence, I mean, people in the States as well as different provinces are talking about the epidemic of the COVID vaccine amongst the unvaccinated, right? It's much worse amongst unvaccinated people. But I wanted to say that, even when I go to door, I have taken extreme effort with people who are anti-vaxxers or people who don't believe in vaccine passports or anything else, to go through their information, to get their sources, to understand them, not to judge them, and to get back to them with more relevant health information. Because I think part of our role as an MP is to be an educator. And I also want to just say that with regards, well, I don't have enough time, but I want to talk about Afghanistan later, but I'll find another opportunity.
Okay, thank you. This question is addressed. This question is specifically addressed to Kelsey. Does your party plan to ban foreign buyers on all properties or rebuilds?
Very specific question. Yeah, we're going to do a 2-year freeze on foreign buyers. That's our plan. Specifically on what's that?
All properties or rebuilds. Where the question's worded.
I'm going to be honest with you, whoever asked that question. That's very specific, and I don't have the answer on the top of my head, but I do have a 180-page binder, and I'd be happy to get back to you on that. I think it's an important question, and those details are the exact kind of things that people, I find, are engaged in our communities. So everyone here who has asked me really great questions at the door, I want to thank you, because you've pushed me to read more and learn more and understand the specifics of why these policies really affect our communities. So I'm going to ask you to either send me a text or an email at info@kelseyshein.ca, because I will answer that question when I know the details to that.
Thank you. I have a question directed to Terry Beech. As Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, part of that job was tasked with coming up with a plan to get salmon farms out of the ocean within the next few years. I believe there is overwhelming evidence that disease and lice infestation from salmon farms are causing enormous problems for wild salmon. When will the Liberal Party ban BC salmon farms from the ocean?
2025. So when I first came to this church and talked about my first salmon farm question, I told the story about how I voted against my own government on this issue, and then I worked to get it into the platform in 2019. And then as the Parliamentary Secretary of Fisheries and Oceans, I've moved that file forward, and there was $20 million in the last budget to continue the transition process. In addition to that, I procured the largest investment in any species in the history of the country, a $647 million investment to protect, restore, and rejuvenate our wild salmon to traditional levels of abundance. And that work has actually earned me the endorsement of Wayne Sparrow, who's the chief of the Musqueam First Nation, namesake to the Sparrow case, which was all about salmon on the Fraser River. It was a great pleasure to work with the province and to work with my colleagues to be able to deliver that, and we have a lot more work to do.
Thank you. I think this is a yes or no question which can be answered by every candidate, so I'll just start with Brad. Do you support raising a substantial increase in support for seniors on fixed incomes and living near or at poverty levels? Yes or no?
Yes, given the increases in consumer price index inflation that we're seeing right now, I think that would be absolutely essential.
Thank you. Kelsey?
Yeah, I'm going to say I support making life more affordable for seniors. I think this is a couple of different things. We're looking at increasing the working benefit for seniors so that seniors can earn more while still earning their Social Security. I think there's quite a few spaces where our government is looking to, or a Conservative government is looking to make life more affordable for seniors. And so specifically, I think working on making life in general more affordable for seniors, because everything has gone up, and being on a fixed income, life is very, very difficult for seniors right now.
Jim?
I'm a lawyer, so I tend to comply with the rules. Was the rule that I say yes or no?
No.
I'm allowed to say what I like?
Sure.
Okay. I obviously NDP position would favor addressing legitimate needs of those who are most in need in our society, and that does include, in some cases, seniors on fixed income. So I would like to see some category of national strategy for identifying seniors who are in genuine financial need and funding for relief of that particular cohort of people in poverty. So thank you.
Terry?
Yes or no answer is probably impossible. It's a deep topic. In general, we have increased substantially the supports that we've provided for seniors. I write a quarterly report about it. It's 14 pages. It's called How Our Government is Working for Seniors. That's available on terrybeech.ca. I would also say that in our platform, we are actually, before the election started, we invested in a new home care agreement with the province of BC. We're investing in nurses, we're investing in doctors, and 50,000 new home care workers, and we are delivering pharmacare. My colleague Jim has said that we're not. We've already signed the agreement with PEI, and I think we have a progressive government here in BC, and I think there's no reason why BC can't be the next signatory to a universal pharmacare plan. That will help seniors significantly.
Thanks very much. I have one for Jim. You promise affordable housing, but what is your definition of affordable?
Yeah, thank you very much. And that is a very excellent question and right at the nub of the housing issue that we face. Affordable housing is housing that's within the purchasing power in terms of the ability to rent or own in the case of purchase, but most practically in our community, we're talking about renting. We're talking about a monthly rent falls within an income that a person operating in an ordinary type of job, the kind of job that you can anticipate somebody performing, can actually pay. It means attainable, achievable. It means a number that if you make $20 an hour to pick a figure, and you work full-time, and you pay a certain amount of that in federal and provincial tax, with what you have left over, you can actually pay rent and also pay for other necessities of life. Thank you.
Okay. This question is going to Brad. How is your party going to work toward balancing the budget given the amount of spending on the pandemic?
In a minute?
Cole's notes.
Yes. So, in the past year and a half, Bank of Canada has spooled up $400 and something billion in order to finance federal government spending. They were also buying mortgage-backed securities from the private banks, and they're starting to, that's what's called QE, and they're starting to wind that down a little bit. So what to do with the size of the deficit? So remember, there's two things here, though. There's the operating deficit, and then there is which is the year-to-year government deficit. And there's also then the structural deficit, which is the amount that is from former deficits and former governments. So our leader, Maxime Bernier, has said that he is committed to attempting to balance the operating budget. And the only way to do that is through economic growth. And we have to unleash the economy, and we have to support the economy, and the economy has to start growing again. We fell back into recession again in June.
Okay, thank you. Kelsey wishes to rebut, followed by Jim.
Yeah, I don't really want to rebuttal. I just want to answer the question. I think it's a good question, and only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to balance the budget. We're going to do it in 10 years. We're going to do 1 year of pandemic recovery spending, and it's going to be meant to boost the economy and get people back to work. We have everything from a job surge plan that is a taxable benefit for employers taking on new employees, especially those who have been out of work for more than a year. And you know, Canada's Conservatives got us out of the last recession, and we will do it again. We will rein in spending following the year of pandemic supports, and we are the only party that will that has a plan to get our budget back to balance. And so this is an important question, and I'm really happy to have answered it and to speak on behalf of Canada's Conservatives.
Jim first. Jim?
Thank you, Lorraine. I want to speak to the NDP's plan of tax reform. We have a situation in our country where very wealthy people are able to avoid payment of their fair share of taxes. Trudeau and his rich friends, they've set it all up so they can live with these trusts and not have to pay the amount of taxes that the rest of us pay. The NDP does have a tax reform policy, 1% capital tax on every people who have more than $10 million annual tax, a 2% increase in the highest income bracket over $216,000, a 15% tax on pandemic profiteers, those that have earned spectacular profits during the pandemic, and generally a tax policy that focuses on making the rich pay their share so that that can be used to address some of the systemic inequality in our culture. Thank you.
Thanks. And Brad jumped in just ahead of you, Terry. So
yeah, I'd use one of these green things that I'd say for questioning Kelsey. I made a mistake when I said earlier the party's position is to balance the budget by the end of the first 4-year term, not from the first year. I needed to correct that.
Well, that's not much of a rebuttal. You can keep the card. I make a management decision. Terry.
I just want to address this point. I want to address the whole issue. First of all, Trudeau's rich and connected friends. We reduced poverty to the lowest rate in Canadian history. If you're talking about the 400,000 kids we pulled out of poverty, those are our connected friends that we've been trying to help for the last 6 years, or the vulnerable seniors that we pulled out of poverty. We've taken more people out of poverty in the last 6 years than any government before us. With regards to balancing the budget, we had the lowest, before the pandemic, we had the lowest debt servicing costs in 100 years while we were making all these investments and growing the economy. The last two Conservative governments, the Stephen Harper government and the Brian Mulroney government, combined accounted for 75% of all of the debt accrued by Canada for the first 150 years. The Conservatives like to sell themselves as these great fiscal managers, but as soon as they get in charge, they reduce taxes for the wealthiest and they reduce services for everyone else. The economy slows and everyone suffers. We cannot afford to go back to that.
Thank you. Keep talking, Terry. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Many progressive countries around the world have successfully moved away from their dependence on fossil fuels, and both the NDP and Green Party disagree with the Liberal and Conservative government's continued support of the Kinder Morgan pipeline, for instance. If you are re-elected, how will you distinguish yourself from the Conservatives' position? Will you proceed with the pipeline construction, and will you continue to subsidize the fossil fuel industry as Harper did? How will you be able to meet Canada's commitments on emissions reductions with the status quo?
So first of all, on this issue, I've done the work. I attended all of the Trans Mountain hearings. I've published over 300 pages of material, and I said that I would be our community's voice in Ottawa, not the other way around. And on balance, our community was opposed to this, and I voted against this project. Now, that being said, with regards to climate change, our government has committed over $100 billion to transitioning away from fossil fuels. We have upped our commitment. We've canceled 8 fossil fuel subsidies already. We've increased our commitment from 2025, reducing or getting rid of all fossil fuel subsidies from 2025 to 2023. Andrew Weaver, leader of the Green Party, says that the Liberal plan is the only feasible plan to hit our IPCC targets. And if you look at Mark Jacquard, who's an economist at SFU, he rated our plan 8 out of 10. The NDP plan got 2 out of 10. It was rated extremely costly and largely ineffective.
Yes, but that's not the question.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. And I would like to speak about climate change. On the doorsteps, it's a very dominant issue as we hear about the warm, ever increasingly warm summers and the rains that come in greater intensity. I suggest that it's impossible to take seriously the climate comments of a political party whose climate action plan involves buying a bitumen pipeline and expanding the export facilities and creating more tanks, oil storage tanks in our increasingly hot and dry climate in an area that's prone to earthquakes and exposing us all to this danger. It simply is incredible. If you're interested in climate action, if you're viewing public policy through a climate lens, you don't buy bitumen pipelines. And I appreciate there's people who rate things high and low for various reasons, but the NDP have a real and strong climate action plan. That's not a climate action plan.
Thank you. Brad wishes to speak.
Regardless of what our feelings were about the pipeline, it's a done deal. And so now we have to talk about business. I live in the shadow of Burnaby Mountain, and I've lived in the shadow of Burnaby Mountain since the 1980s. And the place is crawling with buried pipelines. You can't go off 3 feet off a sidewalk without stepping over a pipeline. The mountain is filled with trails and that sort of thing, and I've hiked it for many, many years. The problem, from my mind, is the tankers. The huge increase in tanker traffic is going to move through our waters once this project is finished. And those of you who haven't been to Burnaby Mountain the last year and a half, it's like the invasion of Normandy up there. It's extraordinary what's going on. So the real question is who's going to refine that oil? Should we be building more refineries and start refining more of our own oil so that it does not have to be shipped out by tanker, and therefore we're also less vulnerable to the extortion level prices that foreign refiners pay us for our own oil as transit fuels?
Thank you. Thank you. This is for Kelsey. Your party has the weakest environmental platform of the major parties. At the last party convention, your party voted no to a motion stating that climate change is real. Why should anybody trust you on your environmental plans?
All right. So Aaron O'Toole, leader of Canada's Conservatives, has stated what we all know. Climate change is real, and Canada's Conservatives have a plan to address climate change. It is the most comprehensive to date that a Conservative Party has ever had, and it allows us to look to the future of how we are going to address the climate crisis that is upon us. So, I think that really takes leadership. So I talk on the doors every day with people about our climate plan. And it's a great one. I think, we have a low cost or a low carbon personal savings account. So people can make their own decisions on how their own families can reduce their carbon impact. But on top of our climate plan, we also have a climate adaptability strategy. So we recognize that climate change is real and the climate is changing. And so we have a plan to put in place national safety officers who will be able to come up with a plan to fight future heat disasters, heat domes, forest fires.
Thank you.
Why did your party vote it down if climate is real? That's the issue.
Would you like me?
She has answered the question. I mean, it's not a one-question debate. I'm sorry. This one is for.
Was it for me? Okay, I'll take the question first and I'll do
No, if you want to talk, you can do it.
Yeah, I put it up. All right, let's do it. Thanks, Jim. I just want to address my friend in the third row. You bought a pipeline is a bumper sticker. It's not a climate plan. This is a climate plan. It's 89 pages. I really hope you read it. It's called A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy. It goes industry by industry and talks about exactly how we're going to transition. The NDP climate plan, and the reason that it's rated 2 out of 10 and is extremely costly and largely ineffective, is basically 14 bullet points. It's not a climate plan. And in terms of the Conservatives, listen, you can't have your election slogan be that we're going to secure the future without having a plan to fight climate change. And it's just simple facts. The Conservatives have fought us on every step forward we've tried to take on climate change, on every environmental bill they voted against. So why did their members vote against climate change? It's because their leaders educated them to do that over a number of years, and that element is still in the party no matter who the leader is.
I have a question for Jim. What will your party do when your plans to tax the so-called ultra-rich come up short?
Well, I suppose by come up short, you're saying that we're not going to raise enough money to address the quantum of our spending. I know this was recently costed, and I know that there was an analysis done. It is true that the NDP stands behind investment, social investment, and many of us believe that that social investment is warranted. Many of us see a society where the discrepancy between the very wealthy and the have-nots is reached a stage where it could tear the rivets off of our social structure. Many of us believe that we do need serious intervention in our economy in order to relieve significant suffering. I could give you so many examples of things that just shouldn't be happening in our culture, and we stand behind addressing those with funding.
Thank you. I have another question for Terry. What is your party's rationale, or maybe it's your leader's rationale, for why we are having this election in the middle of a pandemic? And please don't repeat Mr. Trudeau's hogwash.
Good question. That's a good question.
Look, let's not be naive about this. Every major party that's represented here today outside of the PPC, because they don't have a seat in the House of Commons, have voted in non-confidence against the government over the last year. What is a vote of non-confidence? It's a vote to have an election, right? And the fact is, we're having conversations today that reflect nothing like the conversations we had here 2 years ago. We need to make sure that childcare goes ahead. We need to make sure that we have a science-based, evidence-based approach to COVID-19. We need to make sure that we continue to reduce our debt to GDP ratio and get ourselves back into a good fiscal position. These are decisions and contrasts that exist between what the federal Liberals have been proposing as government and what our opposition has been doing. We got the last supports for business on the last day of Parliament. It almost didn't go through, and then we had a whole bunch of bills that were held up that didn't get through. So everybody wants to say that everything was working perfectly. It was not. It's time to get a mandate in order to point the future direction for Canada.
Thank you. I have a question addressed to Brad. Can you clarify your party's position on the idea of bringing in a capital gains tax on residences?
Did Aaron O'Toole say that?
I don't recall what my party's position is on residential.
Okay, well.
Not an area whoever wrote the question, do you know what it is?
Nope. Anyway, okay. Kelsey. Sorry.
I'm not going to make something up. So if I don't know what the policy that I'm supposed to be speaking to is,
that's
then
fine.
I can't respond.
That's understandable. Okay, Kelsey.
I'm sorry,
I didn't catch that either.
What did you say?
Talk to him afterwards, okay, please?
Not residents, all capital gains.
Yeah, it's not on principal residences. That's on capital gains that are not principal residents. So other types of property.
Well, if it's obviously when a party makes a suggestion, a promise, or an indication what they're going to do, they still have to make the sausage, and that means they have to introduce a bill, and then it has to be debated, and then it has to go to committee, and then something has to come out the other end. So the question of, if we're talking about speculation in real estate, when we've got people who need homes, and we have families that need to have a bedroom for their children, if there's speculation going on with non-primary resident homes, and a capital gains tax can curb that, and to assist families then to actually have homes where they can have a bedroom for their children, then I would support it.
Thank you. This one goes to Kelsey. How will you ensure that Indigenous people, lands, and knowledges are meaningfully included in the Climate Action Plan and planning processes?
This is an incredibly important question, and I'm just going to ask Lorraine if this is all right, if we can all answer this question. I talk every day on the doors about reconciliation. I'm a proud Indigenous woman, and this is top of mind for me as I knock on doors and as I hope to sit as your member of parliament. An Ottawa knows best approach is not correct. Instead, I believe the answers to Canada's most difficult problems, a lot of them reside in the ancestral knowledge of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. This is my values, this is how I was raised, and this is incredibly, incredibly important. So I think when it comes to any kind of Indigenous policy, we cannot use Ottawa knows best prescriptive policy, and we must instead listen to Indigenous people. This is on everything. We are talking about a historic $1 billion investment into Indigenous mental health. We do not have a prescription for it, however, because the answer lies in land-based treatments and in our ancestral knowledge. And so I will be an open ear because that's reconciliation.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question of all the candidates, and I'll start with you, Brad. It's a good question. Politics has become polarized and vicious. During the early days of the pandemic, the different parties were able and willing to work together on issues. How do you and your party create this type of cohesive, constructive environment in the future?
Yeah, this is something I've been watching unfold for a very long time. What's happened to politics is it's become about politicians, not about politics. Politics is the process of deciding what needs to be done and figuring out a way to do it. We focus on politicians in terms of their personalities and their type and whether we like them or not, what their hair is like, have they grown a beard. And we never really actually look into, and I believe the media itself actually shares a fair degree of blame here because they're chasing the hot story, the soundbite they get in 30 seconds. And then you have the clickbait now driven internet world that is also even lowering the level of discourse, where it's just a pack of roving barracudas looking for the next thing. So I think all of us as citizens as well as political aspirants need to be focusing on what the real issues are, move away from personalities, and I will never engage in that type of behavior if I ever retain public office or held a public position.
Thank you. Kelsey.
I'm going to speak exclusively about myself on this question, so thank you for it. I have a long history of being a great grassroots organizer and a collaborative policymaker. This means sitting at the table with a real open heart and understanding with empathy the point of view of our colleagues. This is the type of member of parliament I will be, and I urge our other colleagues to be as well, because I think truly at the heart of it, we all want to help Canadians. That's why we're here. And so for us to each use our unique individual skills and points of view to hear and to listen and then to advocate for the things that matter is the kind of member I want to be. And I think we can hold ourselves to this standard. I think there's been too much over the last 6 years of liberal insiders getting their way, getting their piece of the pie. And instead, if we put Canada first and we put the voices of our community first, we'll be able to accomplish something fantastic.
Thank you. Your turn, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. I think part of the problem that we face in our culture at the moment relates to a flow of bad politics that came from America. And I won't repeat some of the recent history, but there was some very bad politics in America, and it set a very, very low standard of political discourse. And I think I have seen a little bit of that spill over into Canada with great regret. Social media is also playing a part. Social media didn't exist some decades ago, and now facilitates a kind of politics which is unfortunate. I mean, obviously we need to be collaborative. We need to be solutions conscious, tough on the issues, easy on the people. And I'd put forward my 7 years of being in a nonpartisan North Vancouver District Council where we've had to trade votes in order to get things done as the kind of venue where you learn how to work together around public policy.
Thank you. Terry?
So like Jim, I cut my teeth as an independent city councillor, first elected 22 years ago. When I was first elected in 2015, I wasn't exactly surrounded by other federal Liberals in Burnaby North Seymour. So I started a program called the Working Together Barbecue. And municipal and provincial and federal politicians from all parties were invited every year. And it was an opportunity for us to discuss important issues and for people from the community to join us and talk to all representatives and see us working together and talking together. I don't think any party has a monopoly on good ideas. As a parliamentary secretary, when I was ushering bills through the House, I made sure to talk to all of my opposition members about the ideas they had for amendments and passed Conservative amendments, Green amendments, NDP amendments. And I think this is one issue where I can let my reputation sit for itself. I have a reputation in Ottawa as a nonpartisan. I mean, I'm always a Liberal when I show up at the election, but I work with everyone, and that's for the best of our community.
I have a tough one for Terry. There have been multiple ethics breaches by the leader of the Liberal Party. What is your position on these, and what have you done about these behaviors of the Prime Minister of Canada?
So I think it's very important for us to understand that there seems to be a huge centralization of focus on our leaders, and we have all the incentive in the world for all the opposition leaders to throw rocks as hard and as fast as they can. When we talk about what our government has achieved over the last 6 years, that was under the leadership of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We have a cabinet and a caucus that is so focused on delivering for Canadians that we make sure that every single issue it is discussed. Every time that we get together, we focus on the issues and we hold our leader to account as well for times when we think that he screwed up. I mean, I was the first one in the newspaper when a particular incident happened in the last election. So I'm not afraid to have hard conversations with the leader, and I'm willing to continue doing that.
Thank you. I have a question for Brad. What is your party's stance on electoral reform, and will you stand by the recent passed motion to have a citizens' assembly on electoral reform?
My party doesn't have an official position on electoral reform. There is one of the major things that we are advocating is a more decentralized federal system than we currently have, which means giving more power to the provinces in terms of the administration of policy, and that's something that I generally support. With respect to electoral reform, I support that a lot. I don't believe that the first past of the post system serves the country. We've evolved way past it, and based on the polls right now, what are we looking at? We're looking at the potential of a minority between one of the two major parties. But if one of them gets around 36-38%, that means that somebody's going to become effectively a dictator for 4 years with 38% of public support. And I think we need to move past that as a nation, and we need greater representation for parties like mine in Parliament.
Thank you. Kelsey wishes to rebut. Kelsey?
Okay. Again, I don't want to rebut your answer. I just want to answer the question on democratic reform. I think it's an important conversation worth having. So I don't think the way we elect our MPs is broken, but I do think the centralization of power in Ottawa is wrong. And I think only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to strengthen accountability. The ethical violations of Justin Trudeau and his cabinet over the last 2 years have been absolutely deplorable. There have been 3 ethics investigations over those to the Prime Minister, and this is not an accountable government. Only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to address accountability and democratic reform by addressing the ethics laws and strengthening Canada's ethics laws.
Thank you. Does anybody in the audience have a question for any of our candidates? We have an open mic down here. If you would care to step up to it, we will begin to ask your questions from the audience. And the candidates will have, again, 1 minute to answer.
This is for Mr. Beech. If I want the Prime Minister to lean on the Justice Minister, do I pay you for that, or does the party have a bag man, or how do you handle that?
Is that a serious question?
Yes?
Okay. Try to be serious.
Sorry, I only got that if the Prime Minister leans on the Justice Minister, then I heard laughter. So can you just define the last part there?
If I need the Prime Minister to lean on the Justice Minister, do I pay you for that, or do the party have a bag man for that, or how is it handled?
Well, I would absolutely argue that this is not a serious question.
I don't think that's appropriate, sir. Thank you. Next.
Certainly, sir, I'll stand up for my ethics any day in any forum, and I don't particularly think that's a fair question, and I don't appreciate the accusation towards me personally. I think I've acted ethically in all of my activities over the last 6 years. I think I've represented this community well, and I think everybody can be proud to call me their Member of Parliament.
Thanks. Sir, next to the mic, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edmonds. I am the director of the Canadian Electoral Research Foundation and a director on the Equal Vote Coalition. I was born and raised in this district, and recent polling shows that more than 50%, that's a majority of voters, are not happy with any of their choices. We know that Justin Trudeau failed to give us electoral reform, and I've reached out to all of you individually and have not had the chance to talk to any of you. There's been no interest. Terry, it's been dozens of emails in several years, still no conversation. So I ask again, and I gave in the question earlier, what's your stance on electoral reform? And will you stand by the motion that was recently passed, put forward by Daniel Blakey, to have a citizens' assembly on electoral reform?
Yep.
So first of all, I answered a question similar to this in this debate last time, but I personally apologize to every single person because I went door to door saying it was going to be the last election that was going to be first past the post. Unfortunately, the blame isn't clear cut and dry either. The NDP and the Greens wanted a system that used the Gallagher Index that avoided the Prime Minister's preferred version of proportional representation. The Conservatives would only agree if we had a referendum, and the way that the referendum was structured, we knew that it would fail, and we would have spent $300 million, and then we would have not talked about democratic reform for the next 30 years. This was, of course, not taken too nicely by proponents of electoral reform because, it sounds like an excuse, but we had a referendum a similar way in BC, and it failed, and then in PEI, and then it failed. But personally, I think if I was running under MMP, I'd have an easier chance of getting elected every time because I work with everybody across all parties.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, so I have a somewhat naive question, and I'm prepared to be naive in front of you all. There's all this focus all the time on we have to balance the budget in 5 years, 4 years, 10 years. And we're sitting in a time where right now cost of money isn't that expensive. And I think about there are times in all of our businesses and our personal lives, and certainly in our organizations, where we think we should be maybe spending more money than balancing our budget, that the priority isn't like the balance. And if I think of a balance like a balance sheet, maybe I'm naive in thinking that, but sometimes don't you think we should be investing it and being able to make the costs, meet the costs of our investment rather than always looking for like this balance sheet? So if I'm naive, I'm sorry, Adele, because I...
Are you addressing that to anybody in particular?
No, just as a general question. It's like this naive, like I just feel naive that this need to like constantly balance the budget when maybe we need investment in other ways.
So what is the rationale for wanting to balance a budget? Is this the next?
Yeah.
Okay, Brad, start.
That's actually
a great question.
It's not a naive question. It's just a really good question. How the monetary system functions is something that is not explained to people unless you've gone to school to learn how the monetary system functions. And I kind of wonder why they don't explain this a little better to Canadians. Canada is what's called a monetary sovereign. What that means is that the government of Canada has a monopoly on the production printing of Canadian dollars. And as long as it can never run out of them. So anything that it can buy with Canadian dollars, or it can pay for. And the reason that governments run deficits is because, I only had a minute?
Yep, you got 15 seconds now.
Is because, this is complicated, is because there's a shortfall in tax revenue, but the money is in Canadian dollars and they can never not repay it. You only get into a problem if you owe money in somebody else's currency. So that's why the structural deficit is never a problem for monetary sovereigns like Canada.
I think you have to stop now. You're going to confuse us all. Kelsey.
Well, I very much appreciate the question. I gotta say, monetary policy can sometimes feel inaccessible to folks, so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to it. So, first of all, I disagree. I think life is very expensive right now. The last 2 years, everything from gas to groceries to rent has gone up. This is real cost to real people, and I think it means at the end of the month you have less money to get by. So when it comes to balancing the budget, our approach is I believe, a balanced one. In the first year, we're going to continue pandemic spending and recovery spending to get our economy back on track and to get people back to work. Following that, we need to be responsible. I don't believe the government's job is to spend on every program, especially not the federal government. There's provincial and municipal decision makers who spend on other programs as well. And so to rein in federal programs it is an important thing so that we have less inflation and then costs go down.
Okay, we're losing control. Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And it is obviously a fundamental one to how we order our society and order our priorities. In the end, in government, whether it's the District of North Vancouver, provincial government, federal government, or whether it's a family or a household, we're constantly required to balance investment and addressing needs that we perceive as acute against the long-term cost of that debt. And I'm fully aware and very conscious of the fact that my children will be burdened by this debt. So because of that, we must be very, very careful as to the nature of the priorities that we invest on. I've talked before about tax reform. The NDP stands for fair taxation. We also stand for addressing inequality. And I put forward as a matter of my values that we will all be better off, all of us throughout the income spectrum, if we address inequality and fairness in our culture.
Thank you. Kerry?
So it's an excellent question, and the fiscal track that the government has been following for the last 6 years and that we wish to continue is to actually lower our debt compared to the size of our economy. The debt to GDP ratio goes down if you're making smart investments. That is, if you're investing in things that grows the economy faster than you're investing. And so if you're able to do that, then you can actually invest in things that will pay off and actually help grow the economy, create more jobs, and increase our quality of life. One thing that's important to know is that, the government of Canada does not borrow money the same way that you borrow money on your house, right? We issue 30-year bonds, and we were funding the pandemic spending at less than 1% interest rates, almost negative interest rates. So it was an opportunity for us to be able to cover this so that households who have credit cards at much higher rates, provinces who don't have the credit rating that we have, and businesses were able to not have billions of dollars of value destroyed while we were keeping them alive. So we have less economic scarring, and we'll be better off when we come out of the pandemic.
Thanks. Mr. Nickerson has one more wild card, and he's going to use it.
I didn't get a chance to finish what I was saying. Okay, I'm going to blow your minds right now. The taxes you pay to the federal government don't pay for anything. It's a bookkeeping entry. The tax you pay to Victoria, yeah, they use the money, but Victoria doesn't have a printing press. What the government is doing when they're taxing you is they're withdrawing your spending power, aggregate demand from the economy, and redirecting it to other areas in their budget. And that's what a monetary sovereign can do. So the reason you'll run a deficit is because you don't want your economy going to recession, because that's bad. Why do you run a surplus? Is because you've printed too much money and now you have to take more spending power out of the economy, otherwise you're going to get inflation. So those are the two things that the Bank of Canada is charged with helping the government out with: controlling inflation, and if they need money, well, they can print unlimited amounts, as we know, $500 billion.
Thank you. Next question at the mic.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Nickerson,
Yes?
I'd really be curious to know where you went to school for virology, epidemiology, and infectious diseases to make these determinations regarding COVID-19.
You know the answer to that question. So
It is really...
Ask me a question that
That's
I'm
the
gonna
question
answer.
I would like an answer to.
You know that I don't have it.
You didn't go to school for it. You're not a doctor.
Right.
Why don't you just listen to the doctors? Most people in this room believe that this should be done so that we can get past
Can I
this.
answer your question?
You want to keep it going.
Can I answer your question?
Sorry?
That's not really a question, that's kind of an argument, and I suggest that you
want to argue with me?
speak with Mr. Nickerson at the end of the meeting, please.
I told you what I do for a living. So I'm not a neuropsychologist, but I can evaluate a neuropsychologist's report and determine whether or not it should go into a courtroom so that the trier of fact can evaluate it and what they're going to do with it. And I can read virologist reports.
Sir, you're not a doctor, so don't pretend to be.
Okay, so if you think...
That's probably enough. Next.
Thanks a lot. A flavor of this question was asked earlier, but I wanted to make it a bit more specific. The Trans Mountain Pipeline comes out in our riding, and I wanted to just get an answer from each one of the candidates on what you would do to see through its successful completion or successfully cancel this particular project.
Okay, so it's a question to all the candidates on their position of going forward or canceling it.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Let's start with Kelsey. It's about the TMX pipeline. Would you go ahead or cancel it?
So I'm going to say first off, I disagree, and Conservatives have consistently disagreed that we should not have bought this pipeline. That is a mistake. But now that we're here, I do support the building of this pipeline. I think in future, I would like to see true Indigenous partnership when building new infrastructure projects, because I believe Indigenous economic well-being is Canada's well-being. So while I do not believe we should have ever bought this pipeline, in principle, today, I do support it.
Jim.
I do not support the pipeline. The NDP have been clear from the beginning that the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is bad policy. It's bad environmental policy, obviously so, and bad economic policy. We should be investing in green energy, renewables, a green economy, and green jobs, not buying a bitumen pipeline. And we've opposed it from the beginning. Personally, and I'm speaking now about my role as a member of Parliament, I will do all I can to cancel, terminate, and stop the expansion project. That will be my voice in the community. That will be my voice in the House of Commons. I also will call to stop fossil gas exports and fossil gas subsidies and all pipeline expansions across Canada.
Thank you. Terry?
So my record on this particular project, I didn't know that I was going to get elected and spend 6 years in fossil fuel politics, but you get the hand that you're dealt. I've had 3 different NDP candidates come up and talk about all the things that they're going to do to stop this pipeline, but at the end of the day, none of that has ever materialized. I'm now focusing on the 3 underlying issues that people in our community talk about the most, and that's delivering a world-class climate change plan, making sure we transition away from fossil fuels, making sure that we invest in oceans protection, and third, making sure that we get the fire hall delivered on Burnaby Mountain so that we are protecting the almost 20,000 people that are living up there. I'm sorry, sir? Well, I'm in the processing of editing it. I'm not sure if you understand how this works, sir. Like, they're going to ask the question at the mic, and then we're going to respond. If you're not going to respect the rules, then I'd suggest that you leave the debate.
Okay, on that note, Brad.
I think I largely answered the question in my earlier response. I did not support the pipeline when it was first announced, but it's a done deal. It's going to be built. I said you should see how far advanced they are already. I can see it from my window. The question now is the tankers. That's the question. It's not the pipeline. It's the tankers. We got to get over the pipeline. It's a done deal. So do we want tankers, huge volumes of tankers moving through Burrard Inlet? Okay, Seymour is here, North Burnaby is there. It affects both of us. What do we want? Or do we want to build refineries? You speak 3 functional refineries in Burrard Inlet. Shell is gone. Chevron can't get enough product to keep the lights on, and Ioko is a pumping station. What's it going to be? Tankers or refineries to give good jobs to British Columbians, and we can stop being extorted on our gas prices by foreign refiners? That's the question.
Thank you. Thank you. We have somebody at the mic.
Yes, another question for Terry, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep kind of going on about the Trans Mountain stuff for a little bit. I'm trying to understand the thought process behind your leader with regards to making a climate action plan that you seem so proud of, yet still purchasing a pipeline. When you consider our emissions have gone up every year, that we have, like, I don't get how he thinks he's going to fix the climate by just taking our oil and selling it somewhere else to get burned somewhere else in the world. Like, does that mean because we're going to give the oil to somebody else, we have to increase our carbon tax so that when I heat my house, I have to pay more carbon tax because your pipeline has drilled it out? Like I don't get how Trudeau thinks that we are solving that problem.
I guess that's for you again, Terry.
Yeah. So our climate plan is evidence-based. It has been endorsed by a climate scientist in Andrew Weaver, previous leader of the BC Greens. It has been billed as the only feasible plan out of all of the parties that are up here today to actually hit our IPCC targets. Justin Trudeau, when he made the purchase, he wanted to make sure that there was maximum. Is there a follow-up?
I'm going to listen and then I'll ask it because yes, like again, IPCC targets. Which target are you actually mentioning? Like, because the Paris Accord, the one we signed, is from a long time ago, and so I can go here and I can sit here today and was like, elect me, and I will reduce emissions by 100% from 2005 or any other year that you want. I'll make it happen. Like I don't like. Again, you keep raising. It's okay to shoot for the moon, but when are we going to be real about what is economically feasible? When are we going to be real about what we can actually attain? Because in the meantime, it's exactly what Mr. Nickerson said. We're looking at a populist politics. Hooray, you grew a beard. Hooray, you did a one-arm push-up, Mr. Trudeau. Like, no. What is that about?
No. It's
okay, let's just give Terry it.
I apologize, Lorraine, but it comes down to you keep talking about these targets, but you keep changing the goalposts. Which target are you going to go to? And then your people go and talk about Harper-era targets. Well, isn't that the one we signed? Okay. So what one are you talking about?
How many questions do I get to answer?
I don't know. Pick one.
I'll try to do it in a minute. So I guess first of all, what targets are we trying to hit? We're trying to hit not increasing the planet temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the target that we're trying to hit. And the way that Paris was designed was to hit targets and then to have countries increase their ambition over time. Populist politics is telling people what they want to hear to get elected, right? You obviously do not want a carbon price, but we need to have a revenue neutral carbon price so that we can transition the economy to greener, cleaner technology, right? If I was being a populist, I would just nod my head and say, you know what you're saying is oh, sorry, I'm out of time. But
so does that mean that it has to get worse before it gets better?
No, it's getting better. That's the thing. It is getting better. I hope that people will read this document because.
Okay. We're never going to solve this here tonight. I've got one final question for all of the candidates before they go into their closing comments, and I'm going to start this one with Jim. It was reported by the North Shore News that 121 people in North Vancouver are homeless. Homelessness is an issue rarely addressed. How will you and your party deal with this? And also with homeless person who refuses to be housed?
Yeah, thank you very much. And as a councillor in the district, the fact that we have homeless people in our community weighs heavily on my conscience. We have elders who live homeless in the forest. We have people younger than the age of majority who don't have appropriate housing. And it is a complicated issue that requires a multifaceted approach, including mental health supports. But I think I would put it forward as an exemplar of a kind of problem that our wealthy society simply should not tolerate. And to the extent that the NDP and Jagmeet Singh stand for a more redistributive, supportive type of economy and society, this is an issue which is front and center and which our consciences should demand that we solve.
Thank you. Terry.
No, please.
Again.
So we recognized very early on how important it was to invest in all stages of the housing continuum. It's a part of our national housing strategy. Since 2015, we've actually tripled the government's investment in homelessness prevention and reduction with $2.2 billion in support. We're targeting reducing chronic homelessness by 50% by 2027, and veterans homelessness completely gone by 2025. And I would say that it was an honor to participate in the debate sponsored by the Burnaby Society to End Homelessness. I was happened to be the Liberal representative. Peter Julian was the NDP representative. But it was a conversation where every party was asked to send one member from anywhere in the province, and the Conservative Party couldn't even show up. Homelessness is a real issue. The Conservative Party needs to take it seriously too, and I hope Kelsey will address that in her answer.
Thank you. Brad?
Homelessness has usually many issues going along that has led to this person being in this situation in their life. Poverty is certainly part of it. Lack of affordable housing is part of it. Substance abuse is often a component, as is mental illness. And the solutions to solving the problem of homelessness is a function of all those various factors. We used to have a very large residential mental health facility in the Lower Mainland. It was closed in the 1980s because the theory was you could treat them with medication in the community. That was the first sign that something had gone awry, is when we start seeing a lot more homeless people inside the city. There's also the question of why they come to the city, and that's also because the services are. So I would like to see, we need a broad spectrum approach in terms of treatment and as well as in housing.
Thank you. Kelsey.
All right. Thank you for this question. So first thing, we're going to re-implement the Housing First strategy that the Liberal government watered down. But then the other thing that we're going to talk about, and I'm really, really glad that Brad brought it up, is mental health and mental illness. We are taking historic investments into mental health, including a $1 billion investment into Indigenous mental health and drug treatment facilities. We will build 1,000 beds for drug treatment centers. We will build 50 new drug treatment centers. We believe that people with addictions and problematic substance abuse deserve to get better, and that's why we're going to help them. I have to say that I'm a little bit shocked about how little we've talked about healthcare in this debate. This is the #1 issue on the minds of Canadians every single election. And so I'm proud that we're talking about taking a national leadership approach on mental health, and it's something that I hope to continue to talk about as your member of parliament.
Thank you. We're out of questions.
Uh-oh. You're done. Unplug it.
You got to be quick.
Okay, I just have a question for all the candidates. I would like to understand or get your feedback on how each of the parties would deal with kind of the rampant inflation that is going on currently, and how we can tackle that, despite the fact that we still need to provide a lot of funding for a lot of programs, whether it's pandemic recovery or whatever else we want to call it. How do we balance out what we need to spend with stopping inflation at 3.7% year over year currently, which is fairly high?
Okay, I don't know, 1 minute each. This is going to be a challenge. Jim, start it off.
Well, obviously, this involves a complicated matter of finance, and we do have inflation underway. I'm not completely clear in my own mind the causes of that inflation. There's a suggestion that it has to do with fiscal policy, but there's also been disruptions within supply chains and other economic issues. So I think one thing we need to establish is what the actual underlying causes of this inflation are. And then, just as with the other fiscal questions, we need to balance in our priorities and according to our values, the priorities of intervention, economic intervention, the consequences of that in terms of debt, and potentially the consequences of that in terms of inflation. And that's a value judgment ultimately of government, which hopefully reflects the will of the people.
Thank you very much. Terry.
So this is a fantastic question. The federal government basically has two tools to address this. One is monetary policy, or what the Bank of Canada does with regards to interest rates and quantitative easing, and the other is fiscal policy, which is the decisions that government decides to make on spending. There is literature that says that the current inflation is somewhat pronounced because of the kind of doubling up of people spending after having been locked down, but there is also supply gaps, as Jim had talked about. I know for shipping containers, for example, you used to be able to ship for $3,500 across the Pacific. Those rates are now up to $25,000, so that affects every marginal good that comes across the Pacific. A lot of that has to do with disruptions in the supply chain due to health issues. So again, it comes back to we've got to get through this pandemic, we've got to help the world get through this pandemic, and hopefully we can get those systems back into place and standardize.
Thank you. Brad.
Well, as my friend and fellow SFU alumnus Terry said a little while ago, the only way through this is to grow the economy, with the real economy. The reason we've had such extraordinary deficits in the last 18 months is because the economy was flat on its back. And the reason that we're seeing inflation now is because, yes, we have inflated the money supply, but the economy is still on its knees. And until the economy can start rolling again, and because so much of it has been actually structurally damaged, supply chains have been structurally damaged, they have to be rebuilt. And so now we actually have to have a major investment in infrastructure and potentially even reindustrializing here in Canada. So in terms of debt, I'm afraid that anybody who says to you that we're over with using it in order to get through this, I'm not sure I'd agree with them.
Kelsey.
All right, I'm going to answer this question super quickly so I can talk about something else. Let's get people back to work. We've got a plan to get jobs back into the economy, put people back to work, get this engine moving. I'm going to spend the next couple seconds talking about reconciliation. I am an Indigenous woman, and I have pledged to use my voice at every single opportunity to talk about reconciliation. And it's quite late in the evening, and we haven't done so yet. So I will fight for clean drinking water. This is a national shame that all Canadians live with, and I will use my voice every single day to fight for it. I believe true self-determined Indigenous nations should be part of the fabric of Canada, and that's how we will deliver a just society for Indigenous people. And so not only clean drinking water, we will implement calls to action on the TRC 71 to 76, and that's regarding the unmarked graves of Indigenous children as a key priority to be swiftly implemented.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the candidates an opportunity to make their final comments, and we're going to start with Terry. It's just sort of the way it's working out, Terry.
Well, I'm very happy that we've had the opportunity to exchange ideas tonight. I thought I would use my closing remarks to share what leaders in our community are saying about my work over the last 6 years. Mike Hurley stated, as mayor of Burnaby, it has been refreshing to see Terry's willingness to put aside party politics and work on behalf of the people he represents. Terry follows up his words with meaningful actions, and I look forward to continuing to work with him. Councillor Jordan Back from the district said Terry works hard for the people of North Vancouver and is always accessible to address challenges in the community. Terry's work is always collaborative and effective. And of course, Wayne Sparrow, I mentioned earlier, Chief of the Musqueam First Nation. Terry has shown determination to walk the path of reconciliation with Indigenous people, and I encourage people in Burnaby and North Vancouver to vote for him. I'm humbled to be one of 35 candidates across the country endorsed by Green PAC, a nonpartisan organization who endorses environmental leaders across the country. I have been personally endorsed by Andrew Weaver, previous leader of the Green Party. For the third time, I have received the endorsement of the District of North Vancouver firefighters, and I am the first MP to receive the endorsement of the Burnaby firefighters in more than 30 years. These leaders in our community are not backing me for my promises that I am making. They are supporting me for the results I have delivered to our community. So when I say that I'm going to deliver childcare, pharmacare, or that I'm going to make Canada a global leader in fighting climate change, or that I'm going to work to get Canada back to a responsible fiscal track, and that we're going to use the best evidence and science available to end the pandemic and grow the economy, you know that these are commitments that you can trust. I thank each and every one of you for investing in me as your representative over the last 6 years, and I hope I've earned the opportunity to continue to work and keep delivering for your family, and I thank you for your dutiful and diligent consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Your turn, Brad.
So in my opening remarks, I said to you, well, this is my first foray into politics, and I got into it for a very, very specific reason. And with the snap election call in the middle of summer, I've enjoyed having to build a political machine out of nothing in about 4 weeks, which has been fun. What I can say in terms of working with people in the community and moving through the community and trying to get all the things done you have to do just become a candidate, that I've met a lot of really fine people, and not necessarily people that agreed with me, but just a lot of really fine people. And that we all care about this country. We all want it to do well. And we disagree all on the edges of a lot of things, but I don't think there's a person in this room who doesn't love Canada and wants it to prosper and succeed and to be part of that themselves. Otherwise you wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here. But we do disagree. And it's important that our disagreements stay civil. It's important that we think about what question we're really asking and why we're really asking it. Because we are living in extremely perilous times. This is the greatest crisis that our civilization has gone through since the 1930s or 40s. This is serious, people. Very serious. And we need to be all hands on deck, and we all have to be dedicated to a common purpose. So whatever the outcome on election day, we're still all Canadians, and we all still need to be pulling in the same direction. Politics will be politics, and I will disagree with my opponents if I don't agree with the approach they're taking, and I will argue policy with them until the cows come home. But never question somebody's loyalty or good faith unless you have direct and immediate evidence to the contrary.
Thank you. Kelsey.
Well, thank you everyone for your engagement tonight and your wonderful questions. I want to also thank everyone whose door I've knocked on and your engagement over the last 30 days. I want to thank you for this from my bottom of my heart. You have shared your stories and your experiences with me, and I am so grateful for that. I've pet hundreds of your dogs, and I've failed to pet hundreds of your cats. They are not on board with that. So I thank you for these stories. These are the stories and the experiences that give my voice power. I don't believe in an Ottawa knows best approach. And I don't think we should reward Mr. Trudeau's bad behavior with a majority government. Instead, I believe the answers to Canada's most challenging problems exist right here in our community. They exist in the conversations we have at dinner tables about values and civics. They exist in the spirit of our small business owners and our workers who go to work every day to make their families and their communities a little bit better off. And I truly believe that it exists in the ancestral knowledge of our Indigenous sisters and brothers. And so I pledge to use my voice to speak for us with honor and with humility. These are the values I was raised with. I will speak truth to power, and I will work to secure the future. So with that, I urge you this Monday, September 20th, to cast your vote for me, Kelsey Shein, to be your Member of Parliament here in Burnaby North Seymour. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers of this important community event. I know the painstaking work involved in putting in a all candidates meeting of this type on, and I thank you for the work that you've done. I'd also like to thank my three fellow candidates. I can hear in your voice your concern for our community and your concern for Canada. And I thank you for stepping up and making yourself available as candidates. In the little time that I have, I'd like to speak on the role that I see a critical role that I see for the federal government right here in our community. There have been many promises, but few actions on investments, federal investments in transportation and housing. As your Member of Parliament, I promise to lobby painstakingly for these investments. I believe that my experience as a councillor will assist me to build the partnerships required against all levels of government, local government, provincial government, and our Tsleil-Waututh Nation in our riding, to get the investments that are required in transportation, which will then support the investments that we need in housing. We can solve gridlock, and we can solve the problem of our families not being able to live in this community, but we need these investments, and those investments must be led by the federal government. So that's a pledge and a promise to you, and I will make good on that promise. I will also oppose the TMX pipeline. I will call for a green economy and green jobs. I will view public policy through a climate lens. I will guide our economy away from fossil gas exports. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. It's important that you listen to the candidates. Your vote is a critical democratic right, and I thank you for taking that time and effort to ensure that you're casting that vote and exercising that right with as much knowledge as possible.
Thank you very,
God bless
very
you.
much. I think this has been a very informative meeting. I think we've heard a lot of opinions from the candidates, and I would hope that all of those who came here undecided are a little bit better off. How many now know who they will vote? Who didn't know before? Hands up. Still confused. Okay. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I want to thank you all for being here, especially the candidates, and I hope that you felt your time was well spent. Good night.